Senator Warner, thank you so much for being with us here today. And it's great to be in a Virginia CDFI credit union.
Yeah, it's
Thank
great.
you.
Democracy Federal Credit Union. I'm glad to be here, Lisa, and always glad to support everybody with OFN.
Thank you, Senator. You have a real history with CDFIs. Tell us a little bit about how you helped start Virginia Community Capital, how you found us, and a little bit more about why you saw this as having potential. You see a lot of things as a senator, so.
You know, it was a long time ago now, over 15 years ago. I was in the final year of being governor and working with my then Secretary of Commerce and Trade, Mike Schewel, who ultimately became, at one point, the volunteer chair of Virginia Community Capital. He frankly introduced me to the concept.
Okay.
And I was able to secure a little bit of state money, and we started Virginia Community Capital because I was seeing so little access to capital, particularly in rural parts of Virginia.
Yes.
I believe for a long time that in a technology-driven world, it shouldn't matter where you live.
Yes.
But we've not really made that promise a reality in way too many parts of America. So we started Virginia Community Capital back in 2005 with some state funding. It's grown and grown and grown, close to $2 billion of loan portfolio at this point. Some exciting new management coming in shortly.
Yes, indeed.
So that was one piece. And the other piece that I think drove me was, I've been incredibly fortunate in my life. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, went to law school, then decided to go into business. I failed my first time, I failed my second time. The third time was a charm. I got in the very beginnings of the cell phone business back in 1982. But I am under no illusion that if I had not been a white man with the appropriate education levels, I wouldn't have gotten a third shot or a second shot, or maybe even a first shot. And my animating notion is, we live in a diverse America. We live in an America where people live everywhere, and we got to make sure everybody gets that same kind of fair shot that I got.
Yeah, I love your extension from the fair shot to what we do as CDFIs. The last time you and I were together, we were sitting with Vice President Harris, Chair Waters, Secretary Yellen, and we were celebrating one of the first substantial investments that's happened. And you were really part of the architect of that. You were our champion to get that across the line. It was $12 billion. We were announcing the first $1.25 billion of rapid grants. And first, I just need to say thank you. Oh. The fact that we got that through in the last administration, working on a bipartisan basis, amazing. But I wanted to spend a minute with you about the future of federal support for our CDFIs. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the current environment, sure. What is in front of us now. We've got a couple of big programs which are housing related that are part of the reconciliation bill, the $9.6 billion in housing investment funds, the $7.5 in the community revitalization fund, something that's been important to CDFIs. You don't have to speak about those bills in particular, but I am curious about the path forward for new work. What do you think about this?
Let me first, Lisa, kind of step back and look at how we got here, because, we also know, data-driven, COVID disproportionately hit people of color from a health standpoint, but it also did from an economic standpoint. Yes. We lost 400,000 Black-owned businesses in 2020. We knew that as overall successful the PPP program was, that at least initially, many minority businesses didn't get access because they didn't have traditional banking relationships.
You got it.
One of the things I think that I was so proud of where we got the $12 billion, $3 billion of it in grants, and the second round of those grants are coming up shortly, and $9 billion of it, and one of those grants actually went to this credit union, so I'm proud of that. But $9 billion in Tier 1 capital that can be leveraged, 10 to 1. So really important, the ESIP program. But what I was maybe the proudest of was we made it bipartisan. Steve Mnuchin,
Yes.
Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary,
Yes.
big advocate.
Yes.
Mike Crapo,
Yeah.
Republican senator from Idaho, was the then banking chair, big supporter, had 5 or 6 Republican co-sponsors. Obviously, Maxine Waters, who's been a long-time champion of CDFIs and minority depository institutions, was there. And we just, there was a few times as we were putting that together, people were saying, well, Warner, what's this new money? What's this new program? We're just trying to re-up a little bit of the COVID relief. But I think we were able to convince people that, this was needed investment. It could be leveraged. You mentioned some of these new initiatives that I hope will be in the reconciliation bill. As we speak right now, that top line number is very much up for grabs, but you've got, OFN should know that you've got my commitment that I will work with my colleagues. Ben Cardin on the Small Business Administration is a champion as well with some of the SBA related programs. Yeah. Sherrod Brown is very interested in these topics as well, now the Banking Committee chair. Yeah. So I hope we can move forward. Obviously, it's going to be reconciliation. It won't be bipartisan, because I really do think for CDFIs, we need to maintain that bipartisan support as much as possible. Yeah. Because this is about, giving people that access to capital, or teaching people to fish as opposed to simply giving them fish kind of analogy. And, I think the need and the opportunities are great.
Yeah. I've, like you, been in this field for decades, and I think it's bipartisan appeal, and it's just foundational work with the core things that give people a fair shot are important. You mentioned your persuasiveness on saying this isn't really new programs. We're not new. You talk about 20 years of starting Virginia Community Capital. But in fact, the resources that have been over at the CDFI Fund have been kind of stymied. They've been relatively flat while the number of CDFIs has grown. We're over 1,200 CDFIs, and the number has been kind of flat. OFN is on record. Our advocacy is getting that number of CDFI grants that come through the fund up to $1 billion in annual appropriations. It would be transformative. What could we do to work stronger with, as you say, bipartisan, but what could we be doing to make sure that that number gets up higher, that we get closer to $1 billion?
I think we have a moment in the aftermath of COVID, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, and the appropriate, long overdue calls for racial justice. Recognizing that CDFIs, by definition, are serving, low-income people that unfortunately in this country are too often people of color. So I think, you've got a champion in me. I think there will be other champions, and because quite honestly, and I think getting up to $1 billion, since we got $3 billion last year in this moment of crisis, bringing in more private sector companies who I think are saying, hey, we want to do something to help on access to capital. But I think many companies, I know you guys have been very innovative with Google and Twitter. I think there's more opportunities to leverage that. Companies want to do something. How can we leverage that? From the governmental side, I do think CDFIs, while they have had a long history, they've been a little bit of a
little secret.
We've
been our best kept secret.
I don't have, on an annual basis, back pre-COVID, I don't remember a lot of, CDFI lobbyists coming in and pounding the pavement. I think we now have gotten this exposure. I think we've seen this opportunity, and I think we're going to be successful at getting that up to that $1 billion number a year.
Oh, let us hope. You talked about something I keep saying about this moment, and it was driven out of crisis. The PPP put CDFIs in the spotlight, but also the tragic events around George Floyd's murder exposed us to all Americans to really the deep racial inequities and the wealth gaps. You've talked about wealth gaps. CDFIs have been committed to this for our existence. We understand the kind of challenges that this country's wealth gaps. I think the latest survey of consumer finance says that the average white family has 8 times the wealth of the average black family and 5 times the wealth of the average Latinx family. So How do you see us, the CDFI industry, working with you to help close racial wealth gaps?
Well, let's talk about some of the, we know the challenge.
Yep.
One of the things I've been pushing the administration, and we need to keep pushing, is, whether it's the public's attention or business leaders' attention, it's a short attention span. So I've been very anxious that while people are trying to step up on, racial justice issues, that we take advantage and get as much private capital in as possible.
Yeah.
I think lots of companies are offering. I think we need to both monitor that and make sure we can expand upon it.
Yeah.
There is there are new initiatives. The FDIC Mission-Driven Fund, is an idea that $120 million in it at this point. I think it needs to be fleshed out a little more, but that's a step forward. I think one of the we have seen coming out of COVID, both in terms of the African American population and the Hispanic population, enormous growth of startups happening again.
Yeah.
People saying, I'm not going to go back to my pre-COVID life, and having a place to turn to for capital is important. There's another initiative I'm trying to get in reconciliation. We go back to that racial wealth gap of 8-to-1 between white families and black families. A lot of that, and I don't think I fully appreciated this until the last couple of years, is due to the fact that black families oftentimes don't own their home.
Yeah.
The single biggest ability to accumulate capital is owning a home. Yeah. And that home can be lent against to send your kid to college, or lent against, to start a business. Yeah. So I've got something I'm trying to get into the reconciliation package. We call it the LIFT program, that says for a first generation, first-time home buyer, which again by definition will be 2/3 people of color, we will subsidize the interest rate and some of the closing costs, so that if you qualify for a 30-year mortgage, what we'll give you is a 20-year mortgage. So I won't go through all the math now, but the idea is this is a way you can double the amount of equity you would obtain after 10 years, for example, and combining that with some of the ideas around down payment assistance. And I think we've got a pair of initiatives that really goes straight to the heart of that 8-to-1 gap.
You are a CDFI thinker. We have so many of our CDFIs that have known the homeownership challenge, who've been in the fair mortgage business, who have seen wealth close. We've also been working on entrepreneurship, and you expressed your earlier history as an entrepreneur. And so, do we still, but give me some sense of when you're persuading your colleagues, I feel like it's almost easier for people to understand how a home closes a wealth gap, and maybe less easier to understand how owning a business, you spoke about, the challenges of capital, could also be part of closing a wealth gap. Say a little bit about your belief in that.
If you come to starting a business without a lot of experience around accessing capital, or having a wealthy relative that gives you that seed capital, I know I had to learn. You may have every bit as good an idea as anyone else, but if you don't have that mentor, if you don't have that financial advisor, and oftentimes I think the better CDFIs provide that kind of assistance. I remember before I was a governor or senator, I spent close to 20 years as a venture capitalist. I'm very proud of the fact that I funded a lot of minority-owned businesses. The challenge, though, was the ideas were equally good. Oftentimes, the perspective of that young African-American entrepreneur was they oftentimes had a business plan that was just way too unrealistic about how quickly they'd get to scale.
Get to scale,
And, so having a little bit of, where that advisor role comes in, where that guidance role comes in, I think we still, I appreciate what CDFIs do, MDIs do. We've still got, I think, more work to do to crack the code. But the point when I'm trying to advocate, particularly my Republican friends, as I point out, in Virginia, for example, we are now in Virginia 30%, more than 30% actually, African American, Latino, or Asian. If that percentage of people are not getting the same kind of fair chances that the majority population has, Virginia's not going to be as successful. I mean, I try to make the case that this is not only morally the right thing to do, but economically the right thing to do if America's going to prosper.
Yeah. I want to close on the theme of the conference that we've been talking about. It's about financing justice and financing change. And it's our deep belief that that's our business as CDFIs, how we finance justice and finance change. We are going to give a shot to minorities. We are going to be a source of advice. You made my argument for me that we're capital plus advice. But we've had a minute to talk about our moment, the moment of racial justice, what the public sector has done, and we've touched on what the private sector. I actually want to end on the private sector. You know, OFN has been developing this Finance Justice Fund, where we've had our first 2 big corporations come, Google, Twitter, and we think there's potential for more. What would you've been in the private sector, you are now, what will be the thing that will help us persuade more companies to come with a field that actually has track record, 40 years in some cases? What will be the thing in your mind that will help us tip the balance for more companies to come with us now and trust us to be partners with their finance in changing this country?
Well, first of all, I really commend what you've done with Google and Twitter, and I think it's a very creative approach. And there are a lot of companies sitting on a lot of capital at this point, so if they can put it to work at a fair rate of return, but also help make that justice and change possible, I commend them. I do think this is why we need to move quickly, why I've been pushing the administration. We need to both reward companies who do the right thing in terms of giving them public approval, but we also need to make sure that many of the companies who've said they were going to do something, that it's not simply green eyewash, and we need to hold them accountable. And my hope is that in a small way with I know a lot of these company CEOs, having a background as a business guy and now an elected official, I hope I can act as a convener. I know there are people in the Treasury Department that I'm working with at the most senior levels to act as conveners. And if we can then have a few examples where people have said, I've had this great experience with CDFIs, with OFN, with MDIs, I think the sky's the limit. And my hope is we need to think bigger. I know we were talking with the ESIP program. I think about that as a $100 billion program, not a $12 billion or $9 billion Tier 1 capital. I think we need a $1 trillion initiative, big, bold, and aggressive, that says everybody in this country, people of color, frankly, also a lot of rural white communities as well, ought to get the same kind of fair shot that I was blessed and lucky enough to have. And please count me as an ally and an advocate. Let's make sure that happens.
Thank you, Senator. This was wonderful. Appreciate you.